Welcome, folks, to Software Sales Simplified, Move to Success, the podcast for software sales professionals who want to get better. Whether you're a seasoned professional or you're just getting started out, make our podcast part of your daily routine to make yourself more successful. Join us right here and we'll move to success together. And with that being said, I'm very excited to introduce not only my partner in crime, Matt Long, who, if you've been following the channel, you know very, very well. But also a person that I've had the privilege, honor, and deep enjoyment of having been friends with for a number of years, a gentleman by the name of Richard Harris, who's going to be joining us here on the show today. Hello there, Richard. How are you? How's your 2025 going so far?
So far, so good, man. I got paid yesterday, so that was always a good thing. Not that I signed the contract. It's not that I signed the contract, it's that I actually got paid from a contract. So that's even more exciting.
Getting the contract and getting something going and then actually seeing that money hit the bank account. That's always a good day. Well, Richard, you and I go back a ways, and I was talking with Matt a little bit about it this morning because I hadn't really shared with him how you and I got started together. I was working at a software company, and you were brought in by the regional VP who had worked with you on a number of different engagements to act as a consultant to help enrich the skill sets of the sellers that we were working with and make them more effective in certain enterprise deals that we were going after at that time. I had worked with you on a couple of those engagements. I found it deeply exciting to work with you. I enjoyed our collaborations there. And now you've got all kinds of things going on. So I know you have your own podcast. You have your own consultancy going on. I'd love for you to go and share with our audience a little bit about what that is.
So I've got my own consulting business where I teach reps how to earn the right to ask questions, which questions to ask and when, as well as go-to-market strategies for early stage orgs and founder-led sales. I have a podcast called the Surf and Sales Podcast, which is a partner of and a piece of the Surf and Sales event, which we do every year, going down to Costa Rica with about 15 to 18 people from the revenue channels. Occasionally some marketing and customer success show up, having a good time. And then this year we're actually going to Portugal. We're gonna go Euro, and we're gonna hit up Portugal for Surf and Sales in October of 25. So we're
hit those big waves there. They're coming.
That's what, everybody, ever since the big wave thing that hit HB, everybody thinks that's what it is, but where we're going in Peniche is not that. Is not quite that.
That does not look like fun, I gotta say.
There's definitely like we've got it set up so beginners will be on one break, and people who are a little more advanced, if they want to go do something, we'll have that set up for them too. So you don't have to be a surfer, and if you are a surfer, you'll find what challenges you.
I've never surfed before. I don't know if I have the equilibrium to try and pull it off. I'm way more comfortable under the waves with a tank on my back, which I don't know. But
look, I didn't learn to surf till I was 50. So, the age has got nothing to do with it.
Wow. And now you've actually got that kind of worked into your whole workshop and retreat that you guys do. Talk a little bit more about what that is, because that thing's pretty fascinating.
It's pretty cool, I think. And thank you. Because my hesitancy is I don't want to come in here and pitch, but you asked, so I will answer.
Yeah.
It was designed to be the anti-big conference thing that we started. We started in 2018. We felt like the best conversations are often at the in-between moments of conferences. Mm-hmm. So why not build a conference that's almost entirely the in-between moments, right? We're not cramming people through content all day long. We're creating those places where you can have small, intimate conversations, one-on-one, 3 or 4 people sitting together, 10 of us sitting around a dinner table, just having a good time in a very different environment than, the Holiday Inn in Omaha. No offense to the Holiday Inn or Omaha, but it's different. So we wanted to get people out of their comfort zones. We wanted to make people challenge themselves, who have always wondered and thought they maybe could try it, and they can. And we have plenty of people who come and don't surf, or plenty of people who come and they take the surf lessons the first day. They get up because everybody gets up on the first day. And then they're like, it's just not for me, but they're still having a great time because they're in Costa Rica on the beach. So that's the part that matters most. What do we do when we're there? We spend about 4 hours a day on content. And that timing is based on when are the surf breaks. But we only spend about 4 hours a day on content. The rest of the time, we are surfing, resting, relaxing. We really don't want people to work. It's not like, oh, I'm going to go work the rest of the day. No, you're in Costa Rica. Like, go sit on the beach, have a conversation with Kevin or Matt for 30 or 45 minutes because you just got to know them and you just found out that they've had some experience in life, whether it's sales or business or, something else they've gone through or a struggle they've had or a success they've had. And you just want to get to know them. Right? That's the in-between moment stuff, right? So, it's a very different, it's meant to be and was built to be very different than what most people think about a conference. And it is not a surf party, Point Break with Keanu Reeves playing football, right? Like it is not that at all.
I could see you rocking that thing,
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So, as much as my partner, Scott Leese kind of looks like Patrick Swayze when he grows his hair out, he's not pulling a Bodie. So, so it's not that, but anyway, that's a very long answer, and I apologize for anybody who got bored with it. So.
No, and the reason why I kind of asked you that question is because it is an unusual type of venue, and one of the things that Matt and I were talking about was based on the fact that you've done almost 500 podcasts on your surf and sales podcast, which, by the way, we'll put a link in the description so people can follow you, because I am a follower of your podcast and listened to it and been on it myself. But we realized that must be a wonderful opportunity to get exposed to a lot of different challenges that these sales leaders are running into. You must have seen the gamut of that. And has there been any commonality towards it, especially I know you just finished up yours just recently in November. Was there a common theme? Were there common concerns that were being shared by the attendees in your last one? If so, what were they?
I mean, the common themes that come up that I think we're not surprised about are unrealistic goal setting and expectations. I think the lack of humanity in the seller's conversations, right, with customers, which, by the way, that goes on forever, right? That sort of comes and goes with the tide. Obviously, last year's, what's AI going to do to all of us, et cetera. Still the marketing and sales alignment, although that's gotten a lot better since we started the podcast. We started it 4 or 5 years ago, and it was better then than it was 5 years before that. But the silos are broken down, and I think that has to do with the whole Rev Ops team, and the chief revenue officer is now a common thing, right? 4 or 5 years ago, it was still sort of unheard of. It was this new title that was broad, and it's great because it's meant to be a bringing sales, customer success, and marketing together under one umbrella with one decision maker when there are often challenges between the different departments, which is normal at any organization. But now you have someone who hopefully can make all that work together and do it with less animosity between the different divisions and departments and stuff like that. So those are probably the most common themes. And then founder-led sales, right? That's a big theme that's coming up. Your personal brand, right? Building up your personal brand, building recruitment is still always an interesting one. And that ebbs and flows with how the job market is, right? But those are always the common themes. So anyway, so that's it at the high level.
When you say talking about unrealistic expectations, is that from the board or the C-suite or from themselves? Or...
Yeah, well, it depends, right? So, if it's a startup, it usually comes from the board, right? If it's the traditional SaaS and look, even if it's Series B, C, D, which is not really a startup, those are expansion stage companies or growth stage companies. Right. The goals are there, right? They're going after triple, double in terms of revenue growth every year, right? That's where it's coming from. I do talk to Fortune companies, very large companies where the goals are still unrealistic. And at that company, because there's so many layers between the top and the bottom, it certainly comes down from on high. I don't know that it's a board related issue unless it's, there's a big revenue miss. Like I think the board's paying attention. I mean, I think they're a part of that conversation, and they probably at a very large enterprise organization, the board has a great vision of macroeconomics to what's happening based on what those different board members see. So hopefully they can give some solid direction. It just comes down to what is realistic in the world based on what's happening on the front lines, right? The board, I don't care what company, the board can do all they want, but if the interest rates are high and the money's not flowing,
right?
Guess what, right? Like 2024, we all thought was going to be a relief from 2023, and it really was not.
Mm-hmm.
It was just an extension. It was just the second half of the game. I think there's more optimism in 2025. I'm certainly seeing it and feeling it in my business. I can tell you what I see and hear. But I think this year will be a little better than last year. 2024 was better than 23, but wasn't much better.
Yeah, the relief didn't really manifest, did it?
No, not at all.
No, I've been in leadership roles where that pressure coming down from the board was making its way past the C-suite into like all levels of leadership inside the organization and causing chaos. Yeah. So I'm familiar with what you mean by that. And had I known then what I know now, I might have approached the way that I worked with the teams very differently to respond to and to arm the executive suite relative to those activities.
So what would you do? So let's pause right there, right? I'm going to flip it on you. What would you do? Because I think people who are listening are going to be like, oh yeah, I want to know what he would have done and said. So what would you have done and said differently now that you do have that experience?
Well, I mean, generally speaking, every time I've had interactions with the boards, maybe I'm just been fortunate with the boards that I've had to deal with, but they're all about data, and they want to be able to see information and be able to prove that versus the models that they have. Consequently, going back to them with information that doesn't necessarily present a business case, right? That doesn't have hard data behind it. It sounds like opinion and waffling, and it often doesn't land very well with those board members at all, right?
Yeah.
So being able to go in and concisely as a team develop an counterpoint argument and a recommendation that's different based on the actual data.
Yeah.
That gets as close to what it is that their goal is, because their goal is they want their money back, right? They want to make more money on this investment. So how can I build that? How can we build it? This is not reasonable. This is, and that path is not going to get you what you want. This path will, and use data.
Yeah, and I want to break that down to any of the individual contributors who are listening, right, or watching. Is that the same goes for you? You got to know your numbers, right? If you watch Shark Tank, which I think a lot of people in sales do, if you don't know your numbers, those people aren't investing you. So if you're an SDR, you need to know your numbers, right? You may have a goal of number of meetings or dials and all that stuff, but take those results of those numbers and apply them based on, well, what could I improve if you have the tools to help you improve, and coaching from your rep, from your manager, and being able to say, look, I've made this many calls, I got this many conversations, and only this many converted. Could you come listen to me, Matt, for 3 or 4 calls and coach me? Because I'd like to have my conversion rate go up, right? So I just want people, if you're going to try and grow your career, what Kevin said is perfect, and it applies at every level of every role along the way. And that as a rep, as an SDR, an AE, to take it to your manager, as the manager to take it to your director to take it to your VP, and your VP up to the CRO and to the board, right? You just got to know your numbers. And so I just really wanted to double down on that for people, because I think sometimes SDRs and AEs feel like they're just being whipped around, right? And like they're on a chain and they're just getting flung left and right. And it's like, well, you are. And there is something you can try to do about it with some logic. And if people don't like the logic, they don't want to shift their opinion, well, that's not a piece of information we like to have, but actually I kind of do like to have it, because then I can make my own career decision, right? I need to find better leaders.
It required having an honest and unbiased eye on what you're actually doing, right? And putting pride aside and say, if you want to get better, you have to really establish, what am I doing now? How is it working? And ask for help, right? Because sometimes we get so into our own ego that I can do this, I can do anything, I harder. but it's really about learning with your peers and your team. Where I've been the most successful.
Really. Yep. I completely agree.
Matt, if I know I worked and sold with you a long time, so I know that you intimately get this, and I know that you're also a big person on being able to do the analysis and get to the numbers. What are some of the things you might recommend for somebody that, or even at the organizational level, in terms of tool sets or what have you, in order to be able to do that kind of breakdown and analysis to get better, as Richard was just saying?
Well, I mean, everyone has their own internal systems, but the first thing is just go to Salesforce and pull all the opportunities and see where they are, where they've fallen out. But then it's hard for me to evaluate. I'm not a sales leader. It's hard for me to evaluate them across all the deals that I don't know anything about. So I can only really focus that. What's the overall trend and how am I comparing against that? And then I can look for those indicators across different verticals that do well, or different cadences or levels of meetings that we've had. I can compare that to what I've done and see how has that moved the needle for me? Is that consistent with what I'm doing? Could I be improving in that area? So that's what I look at. I have a lot of, as you know, I have a lot of internal spreadsheets for myself. I like monitoring everything and not gamifying it, but I need to know where I stand so I know where I want to go. And even as an SC, that was critical for me to run my patch like my business, right? So I knew what was going to come in, I could expect to come in, what I could push, what I could try to bring over the line earlier, even though it wasn't technically my number because I wasn't the sales rep holding the quota. It was my money, right? It was my quota that I had to match. So that was the approach I always took.
That's great. I love that. I like it.
I am curious, you've been doing this for quite a while. So I don't age you too much.
I like to say, look, I've been selling since the 1900s. Okay. I'm old enough to say
there
that.
You go.
All right. So it's the late 1900s, but it has been the 1900s.
Back when it was the Pony Express, and that's how things got around.
It was before email. Trust me.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's true.
Ask, my son last night's like, what's a fax machine? I'm like, okay.
But
go ahead.
How have you seen changes into the kind of the sales cycles, the sales approach, and things over the past 10 years or so? I've noticed some particular things myself from about 20 years, in terms of how approach is different. But I'm curious from your perspective, are there challenges that have changed over time, or is it pretty much very similar things, just in different eras?
It's a little bit of both, right? At the highest level, I always like to say nothing has changed in sales since Mesopotamia, right? It's goods and services in exchange for bartering. We're not using goats and cows anymore, right? But there's something of value, some intrinsic value. I think that what has changed is we've learned how to get better at the conversation, right? And I think in the last 10 or 15 years, even the best salespeople, the most successful salespeople, are the ones who are far more willing to adapt and to try something new, to learn a new phrase, right? And look, we all get stuck in our certain spots of doing things a certain way over time. And even the best salespeople do. And every now and then you got to sort of like whip your head out of that, right? Get your head out of your ass and sort of, oh yeah, maybe I should try something new and different. So I think the ability to self-examine, be self-aware, and to learn has gotten better, also because it's gotten easier, right? Like the three of us are old enough to remember what microfiche is, and that you couldn't do research unless you went to the library on campus, right? So it's a very different world. So it took a far more amount of effort to get information, right? Even the simplest of the fact that you can do an audio book versus buying a book and it's there instantly, right? That there's access to information on YouTube and all these other places, so that there's access to education for those who want to learn. That's probably the biggest thing. And because of that, I've seen the skills development slowly improve. I don't think that that's across the board though. So but I think the ability to educate is better. I think that everybody is a little bit smarter. I don't think the customer's as smart as they think they are, as much as, HubSpot likes to claim when they say they're 70% of the way down the path of, before they talk to a salesperson. Like, I can also tell you I've talked to enough customers that customers don't learn how to be buyers. We learn how to be sellers. We spend time on it, right? Based just the fact that we go and train people, right? So this belief that your customer is really smart, up until a point, up until about 45% of the knowledge they need to make a good decision. But I'm smarter at 75%. And I can say this, look, this is behind the curtain, right? Like I would never go out with this attitude in front of a customer, right? And then back to the other thing that's changed. So this is where I'll flip it back to with the customers is, the word empathy is being tossed around a lot. That's the big buzzword in the last 5 or 10 years. And I don't think that ever went away. I don't ever think that didn't exist before. I just think that word can circulate now through social media so everybody gets it. But I still think people get empathy wrong. They sometimes think it's sympathy, not empathy. But the fact that they're even discussing it tells me that these people want to be better and that they see the value of actually providing value to their customers, not just, try and sell somebody something transactionally.
It's funny you would say that because Matt and I, it's one of the things we talk about in the book that we wrote in the methodology that we set up. And we were talking about on one of our prior podcasts not too long ago. And that is that if you're partnering with somebody, it's your responsibility to recognize that that your customer probably does not have all the answers. They may think they do, but the chances of them actually possessing them is actually not great. The discovery process needs to be a part of that partnership. It's the beginning of the partnership between you and the person you're selling to. And as you're going along the process of asking questions, monitoring the deal, monitoring the sales campaign, you should be exchanging information and giving the customer as much of an opportunity to learn about themselves and about what they think they know and the reasons for moving forward with a particular solution or what have you, as you have with them. Now, Matt asked an interesting question before we got onto the podcast today. And it was something you and I and the three of us have talked about before. And that was the concept of understanding pain. So that's like part of that relationship with the customers and this thing about them having the answers and how to get to that, how to explore that and nurture the understanding with the rep. What are some of your thoughts on with the way things are going today and the technology available? Best ways to do that.
So I don't think this has changed, right? I think this has always been the case for the best sellers, right? We've all known this. And people love to say storytelling. You got to be good at storytelling. Well, what does that mean? It's like, give me a break. It's like, basically you have to get your prospects and customers to Bob Ross their pains for you.
Yeah.
Right. You have to ask questions that paint their specific pictures of pain that they feel day in and day out with use cases. Right. They don't want to hear telling. They want to tell you something. They don't want to hear you tell them anything, right? Other than that you can relieve the pain. So we have to ask those kinds of questions. So like even in my first call, when I set up my first call and I run through a respect contract and sort of introduce the call for 2 minutes, my very first question is very specific. And it's, hey, Kevin and Matt, what's going on over there that made you even want to have this conversation? I'm not asking, why did you want to have this call? I'm asking what's going on. I'm asking you to describe and paint a picture of what's happening in your organization to tell me why we're even talking, right? Because if I say, well, why do you want to have this call today? Well, now I'm making the both of you defensive, right? As Chris Voss says, right? You have to defend why you're here. I don't want you to be defensive. I want to just know what's going on, what's happening, what's broken, right? And from there, I can then start digging deeper. But so again, you have to encourage them to paint these pictures of pain. And then, we were talking about the other day too, is like, well, what is the implication of that pain, Kevin, is what you said. We were chatting, right? Like, okay, well, now that I know that's your pain, you're not hitting your targets and you're not hitting your goals and you're behind on revenue and the board's breathing down your neck. Okay, well, that's a great reason to talk to us. But what's the implication of that? Which is going to be things like, I might get fired. We might have to lose headcount, lay people off. Like you got to get them to paint the other part of that picture, which is the negative outcome, the negative consequences of not solving the pain. And that to me is the essence of what our job is in sales. And if we can ask those questions and they can hear themselves say it out loud, it makes it a whole lot easier for them to be willing to listen to the suggestions I have about ways to potentially solve them, which, yes, of course, is me trying to get them to purchase what I have. But now I'm connecting the dots and I'm doing a whole lot less of the selling. They're selling themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a whole art to the empathy of eliciting the pain as well, right? Because you're not trying to shine a light of it and call all their sins out on the table and expose that, right? Because that is very scary and no one wants to do that. Yet at the same time, creating a safe space for them where they feel they can share this information. And sometimes that's by saying, hey, I had a similar customer in a similar situation that was having these issues and this was causing, is that, so at least you start gaining this like, I'm not alone, right? I think is a very effective way of helping them see like, okay, I don't have to bottle this stuff in. I can actually share this. And this is a person that might be able to help me. Right. And I think that's a really key differentiator there as opposed to just trying to pry all this information out of them. That makes people feel very vulnerable and afraid, right, to do that.
Yeah, spot on. Cool. So Richard, we talked a little bit about that. And I know that about being able to go to explore the pains and understand the implications of them. And you talked about Bob Rossing, have the customer Bob Ross their pains for you. I'd love for you to explain that a little bit more because you went into details last time you and I were talking about that. I found it a fascinating approach. Could you elucidate on that a little bit here?
Yeah. So, for those who know Bob Ross, or if you don't know him, go Google him. You'll understand in a minute. But, he was such a sweet-hearted, genuine human being and just saw the beauty and joy of life and the world and tried to express that through painting and then teaching other people how to enjoy that, right? And so, when I'm asking someone to Bob Ross, and I trying to make them an angry Bob Ross painting angry little trees, right? Like I've got this image I use, y'all have seen it. So that to me is the key piece is how do I do it in a safe space, as you said, giving people the space and the grace to share what they want and make them feel less nervous about sharing that. And that, and that's where tonality comes in and pace and inquisitiveness and eye contact and all those kind of little things matter so that someone can feel like it's genuine. Which is why I was probably never very good at transactional sales, right? Online, where it just went really fast, right? I just needed that. That's my personality. So the goal is to get them to just paint their pictures of pain. Well, what does your day in, day in look like when you're trying to solve this, right? How much is it affecting you by doing this? Why, just out of curiosity, Kevin, Matt, why are y'all trying to solve this problem now in January of 2025 versus January of 2024? Did it not exist a year ago or something? Like what's going on over there, right? So that I can get them to feel comfortable to share their complete picture with me, right? Because look, if I hire and train salespeople, the first thing I want to teach them is enough about the industry to understand the basics. And then I want to teach them use cases and case studies, because that's the essence of where storytelling comes in. And that's the essence of where active listening comes in. So you can actively listen and then pull from these different use cases and case studies to explain the story of like, I understand. And not only do I understand, I've had someone else who's done it and here's how we solved it from them. And, look, I think everybody who's listening, including both of you, have probably said, yeah, well, I suppose the good news is you're not alone. You're not the only one who's had this pain. That doesn't mean you don't have it and it doesn't feel real. Your pain is real. I get it. But, you're not the only one. And I'm happy to share with you how I help solve it for other people if that's what you want to hear. Right. So people like that, right? People want to be seen, heard, and understood. That's what matters to them the most. And so something like that helps them reduce their anxiety in general about the fact that they may be on a path to solve this problem, which is a good thing. but then it also reduces the anxiety to hold things back. And so they start to tell more. So, that's what we're trying to do in terms of answering your question about how do you get them to do it. I hope I answered the question you asked. If I misinterpreted it and just went off on a rant, please course correct me.
Yeah. I think it's great. One thing I want to circle back on that you mentioned was the, why now? What's changed? Right. I love that question because a lot of times nothing's really changed. Now, sometimes there's regulations that are in place or someone's come in, whatever, but a lot
there
of
was no budget. Like 2024, we had the same problem last year. I just wasn't allowed to spend money on X.
Right.
Yeah. But it's a very gentle way of asking, why haven't you addressed this before?
Right.
So I think that's a great one to call out.
Yeah, totally. So,
well, one of the other things that you had brought up, you were talking about how we want to be empathic and we want to listen to what people are saying so that we can bring up the case study that as we're listening to the things that they're being challenged with, we can turn around and respond with that. And Matt, I know this is one of the things that you had mentioned earlier on when we were talking earlier today, where sometimes when people as sellers are engaging and they're listening, but they're not doing good active listening, as Richard mentioned just a moment ago, sometimes they have a tendency to jump the gun and they hear the first thing and they respond to that first layer, and that's where they stay. And Matt, I know that active listening is a very important aspect and selling tactic to you. So maybe you can elucidate a little bit on where, active listening, when it falls short, where it's improperly exercised as opposed to properly exercised.
Yeah. I mean, look, I do it all the time with my kids, my wife, everyone. I mean, you're trying to gather information, categorize it, and then respond right away. Right? This is the world we live in. Same thing in sales, right? So I know kind of the realm of what I work in. It's like, oh, you got that? I got it. I know, right? But that it's just human nature, right? To be highly efficient with all the information coming in. But we can all take a lesson to just pause and just ask one more question, right? Just start there. Yeah. Just like, well, what do you mean by that? Or what does that mean to you? Or how would that be better? And once you start doing that, it really flips it, because then you start getting information that you didn't know. And it just makes you more curious. But I think that is the goal with me. And I start a lot of times with my family and my kids, right? It's like, because they say something and I react right away, and I'm really making an effort. You can ask them later how well I'm doing, but I'm really making an effort to step back and just
you mean you are, Matt? Come on. I thought you were a perfect father like me, and a perfect husband, right? So,
yeah. Well, after years of therapy, that's going to be the conclusion.
I'm 20 years down that path too. I agree with you 100%. Like, I think that's good. There's a game I play with sales teams when I'm doing it's on active listening, and depending on the generation of the sales team, I'll pick a song. If it's of our generation, I'll pick a Billy Joel song, Piano Man, and I'll start asking them questions, right? Like, what were the businessmen drinking, right? Or who was practicing politics, right? And a lot of time, or if it's younger generation, I do Taylor Swift. So yeah, I get it, right? And the whole point of that is that here are songs that people often know by heart. And sometimes they can't remember every lyric unless they're hearing it. But now you're walking into a sales conversation and you don't know any of the lyrics. You might know some of the lyrics because we know the ICP, we know the addressable market, we know their common pains based on their title and role. But at the highest level, those are all still buzzwords, right? Which was sort of what I was hearing, Matt, was from you, was like, people come to, I think the three of us, like, hey, we missed our goals last month and I really want my team to get better at discovery. Okay, well, that's surface level one. But my response to that isn't, great, well, here's how I teach discovery. My response to that is, so Kevin and Matt, like, I hear that word all the time, but what does discovery mean at your organization? Because it's always unique at every company, right? And oftentimes it'll turn into, we need better discovery around timeline, or we need better, okay, well, when you say timeline, well, what do you mean? Are you not getting timeline? So you just keep layering in for deeper explanations to get them to Bob Ross that picture.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
To get them to paint that picture of pain. So, and active listening is crucial and critical. In fact, it's the very first exercise I do in my sales training is active listening. And then I say, why did we do this first? And they'll be like, because you want to make sure we listen all day long. I'm like, yes. Like, they just walked right into my trap, right? But anyway, so yeah, I think you nailed it on that too. So
there was a salesperson that both Matt and I worked with in the past. This person was very clever at recognizing their own limitations on subject matter, and was famous for creating a pseudo curiosity environment where they'd ask the first question, they'd get an answer, and generally speaking, and this person admitted to both of us, didn't actually understand the answer, but would then ask, interesting, tell me more about that.
Right.
Tell me more. And then would do that 2 or 3 times to understand more. And just by opening the door with that additional question, even though they didn't possess the understanding, they were able to create an environment where that person that they were interviewing was opening the door more and actually helping build that understanding with this particular seller. And to the point you made just a moment ago, Matt, building that level of communication and trust with that person that they were trying to sell to, so that that person would be more giving and more open and more likely to share relevant information and actively engage the seller as the sales campaign moved along to discover things.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think we're talking about primarily AEs and things, but from the SE perspective, there's an additional pressure because SCs a lot of times are supposed to know everything technically and stuff like that. So they're very quick. This is what I found early on in my career. So I'm the smart guy. I got the answers. I know what you mean. And like, oh, the customer says, we need to integrate with this system. It's like, okay, great. We got that. Blah, blah. Instead of like, integrate how? What does that mean to you? What do you mean when it's integrated? Because all they might mean is like, I need the UI together in one. And we're already configuring at the API level how we're going to pull this data in, right? It's
just going to say, this is where I think active listening needs to be applied internally, right? Like where, look, you're bringing in your team. There's not a team sport that I know of where there's not someone leading the team on the field. It doesn't mean they lead every conversation and they score every point or every goal or every touchdown or make every hit, right? But there's somebody there leading people. And I think internally, we have to do a better job of active listening, particularly with the SEs and customer success too, to say, hey, when we look at our best calls, the ones where SEs and AEs do real well, here's what seems to work. Can we replicate that, but also give enough space and grace so that we can be flexible as Matt needs to come in on the technical side, right? Versus Kevin and Richard on the sales side, right? Here's our roles. Here are the things I'm supposed to talk about. Here's what you're going to talk about. If something comes up, any of us can jump in, but let's make sure that we're in tandem on this thing, right? So I think that's a really critical piece, and you have to go back internally as much as you do it externally.
I think this brings us full circle to one of the things you were talking about when we started the call today, which was how do you deal with unreasonable expectation, right? You're talking about using those active listening skills internally. As organizations are building their expectations for the coming year, do you think that if they were better at engaging with active listening internally to their own teams, that they have to collaborate with the sale, the SDRs, the services people, the sellers, the pre-sales people, would they be able to create better expectations that were more realistic?
Yes. So here's the challenge, right? And I started harping on this a couple of months ago. It baffles the mind. Now we have all this gong and video recording, and we got these AI tools who can listen to all our calls and coach us. Where are the internal conversations that are being recorded and tied back to that deal? Because how many deals that you're working on have me going to Matt on the engineering side offline to discuss how we're going to do this, and then having to go to Matt's, the CIO or the CTO, and then me going to Kevin and going to the VP of sales and the CRO or the CMO. How many internal conversations? How about the big deal meeting with the CEO who wants to come in and tell us how to do shit, right? Like, why are those calls not recorded and also tied back to the opportunity into your CRM? And therefore, that helps with the projection of the reality of the deal, as well as make the right suggestions, because now you have your customer's point of view, your salesperson's point of view, your sales engineer's point of view, and your entire internal organization point of view. Like, why are people not doing that? And it blows my mind that we haven't crossed that chasm yet, because it seems like it would be super helpful.
Yeah, I think now that you mentioned that, one of the things that I attribute my success in sales over the years is the fact that I held every AE accountable to have pre-meetings, post-meetings, intermediate meetings. We talked multiple times a day about.
And how many of them did you record?
When we started getting gong, some of them started getting recorded. A lot.
They did.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And could you? So again, this is a couple of years ago, before maybe we had the full AI piece.
Right.
Now, because you've recorded those, did y'all ever go use them at that point? Or was it like, no, we have it recorded in case an idea comes up, we can get back to it?
We never went back and really analyzed them.
But
we would
now
just
that
go
you
back
could,
for notes or what did we talk about?
But now wouldn't it be cool if you had that tool, you have, whether it's Agent Force or any of the other tools, right? That as soon as that call is recorded, right? Like I use Fathom all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it sends me that snippet of that conversation, which then goes into my CRM. Well, right after that internal conversation, it'd be great if it could compare, here's the internal conversation, here's the external conversation, here are some projected next steps you should think about, right? That would just be brilliant in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just think about your most high-performing teams understand how they work together outside of the customer or prospect. And I think that's where most of the success actually is. I think you're spot on there. Yeah. Well, there we go. That's our idea for today. That's like,
there it is.
That's a good one. That's great.
And next week we are solving world hunger. I have that set up for Tuesday.
I think this week, unfortunately this week we need to solve some fires down in LA.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
But
yes,
a bigger, shout out to anybody who knows anybody out there, and we hope they're all safe and you're safe and all those kind of things. So
absolutely. Well, Richard, I hate to say this because I could sit here and talk to you for hours, but I think
believe me, I can talk for hours.
I know you well enough to know that that's actually true. I've sat in a few bars with you before, and I know that is well within your capability. Yeah. But we do need to wrap up today's set. So first of all, thank you very much for coming on to the call with us, coming on to the session. I always find you fascinating to talk to, and I know Matt does as well. Is there anything you want to kind of touch upon? Give a little promo on anything? What's coming up in your world? Hit up next.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're going to let me plug something, I'll plug Surf and Sales in Portugal coming up. I'll plug my book, The Seller's Journey, which has a lot of this pontification, because, as my mother says, it's a great book, except she just wished I didn't use the F word so much. I think that to me is the best review ever. Because, I know I hit a nerve. But those are the two things. And look, if people need help, I always talk to people. I'm a little crazy, like 415-596-9149, 415-596-9149. That's my real cell phone number. It's the one my kids don't answer when I call them, so I know it's real. But text me to let me know you heard me on the show. And if you ever have a question, I'll jump on a call with people and just try and help them out, put some good karma in the world.
Absolutely. Matt, you've had some amazing insights today, and there's other ones I'd love to go and have just a podcast for you to explore, you and I to explore together. Anything you'd like to kind of wrap up our session today with before we go and say goodbye to our listeners?
No, other than, Richard, always a pleasure to talk with you. And I'm sure we'll have many more conversations to come. Maybe not in as formal of a setting, but they'll be enjoyable nevertheless. So thank you.
Look, whenever you can get back to the mainland from Hawaii, Matt, that's...
If I can make it back from Hawaii, yes.
Exactly, right. I still haven't gotten an invitation. I'm still waiting for you to buy my plane ticket, so, But...
You won't even buy my plane ticket.
I know.
I'm going to buy you a plane ticket.
Yeah. And don't buy us plane tickets. Let's just all three go to Portugal for Surf and Sales in October.
There you go.
Love that idea. Yeah. I love it. Love it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this kind of wraps up our session today. For those of you that have been listening, thank you for spending a little bit of time with us today. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed recording it for you. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe, follow our podcast. If there's something you'd like us to be talking about, please take a time to either comment on the channel itself, tell us what you would like us to talk about, any topics or anything like that you'd like us to explore. Let us know, and we'd be happy to try and do that. But otherwise, we will see you here next time. And before we go, the little legal disclaimer we always have to make at the end. Thank you for tuning in to Software Sales Simplified, Move to Success. This podcast is produced by and the sole property of Strategic Sales Optimization, LLC, copyright 2025. Any use in whole or in part of this recording without the prior written consent of Strategic Sales Optimization, LLC is strictly prohibited. All rights reserved. Gentlemen, it has been a pleasure and an honor, as always, to spend a little bit of time with you. And to our audience, I say goodbye. Richard, take care, sir.
You too. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate the time.
All right. Bye.
Take care, folks.